Hello everyone, compliments of the season. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is GENIX-JS, a YouTube channel dedicated to teaching you how you need to know to get started with front-end web development. We're back again, and this time we're going to continue from where we stopped. We stopped at data types methods. In this video, I'll be taking you through control structures, which is a very important concept when dealing with programming. Alright guys, so if you don't have the code installed, there's a link in the description below leading you to all the code we've written from video 1 till this very video. So I have my browser opened here, and I'll need you to navigate to the link. That's the code link that shows you everything. This is it on GitHub. So this is video 5, and if you don't have the code installed, I have a video that teaches you how to set up a GitHub project on your VS Code. So now that we have that settled, I have VS Code opened, and in this particular project, this is the same folder as the one here on GitHub, right? If you don't have a GitHub account, there's a video in the link in the description leading you to how to create one, right? So now I'm going to create a new folder and then call this 05 Control Structures. So just make sure you add it together, Control Structures, right? So now control structures are basically it's a concept in programming generally that allows you to structure how your program flows, that allows you to condition how your program flows, whether it's using conditions, whether they are conditions, whether you want it to be repeated, whether you want it to be sequential or even asynchronous, that's happening outside the normal flow of the context. So everything that I'm saying will be explained using code. So the first thing I need you to do is to create a new index.html file. So once that's created, type your boilerplate code. So hold shift and 1 and then click on enter, and then we'll rename this to control structures, and then just a simple div, because with an ID of wrapper, because we've been making use of this div a lot, right? So now that you have that created, click on this folder, right click, and then create a script.js file. So this script.js file, this is where our control structures code will be. So we have 3 control structures, particularly in programming. In JavaScript, we also have 3 control structures, and as I said, control structures is a concept in programming that allows you to define the flow of your program, right? How structured your program is. So the first control structure is known as sequential control structure. The second one is known as selective or conditional control structure, and the last is known as repetitive or branching, right? This branching is also known as looping control structure. So we'll look at them one after the other. So sequential, basically this control structure allows you to it's just the normal flow of the program. In our previous video, let's look at the functions. We have programs that we wrote, and immediately you run it. Like for example, this calculates age, this one happens, and then it runs this one, and then after it runs this one. So line by line is sequential. JavaScript by default is synchronous, and to be synchronous means to be sequential, to go after one after the other. So that's basically what the sequential is. So I'm going to create a simple variable. I'll call this age equal to 10, and then I'll create another variable. I'll call this name equal to Mike. So for us to see the sequential control structure in action here, we can say console.log name, and then we can say control.log age, right? So this is a sequential control structure because it allows you to define the order by which your program runs or executes particular lines. So this line is surely going to execute before this line, right? So that's basically what the sequential control structure is. If we want to alter this, we can create functions, and functions basically allows us functions follow sequential control structure once they are executed, right? So I'm going to be running this with live server once they are executed, right? So I'll run this with live server. So we can create a new function. I'll call this run action. So this function will basically return the person's name and their age. Return your name is Mike, just a static stuff, and you are 10 years old. You are 10 years of age. So this is actually defining the rule of sequential, but if I run it, you can see that if I run action, this is going to give us this at line 17. So let's run this. Let's first link our JavaScript, right? So we have script.js, and then right click and open with live server. So once you have live server open, just inspect your browser. So I'm going to be docking this in, right? I'm using Edge. You can use any browser of your choice. It just really matters on your preference, because you're not really concerned about the browser, you're concerned about what you're doing. So you can see this gives us mic. Let me clear this and reload. So this gives us mic, this gives us 10, right? And sorry, you see that we're returning it, right? We're returning it, but if we console.log run action, we're going to get the value, because when you return a function returns the value, and that value is what is being console.log. So you can see it's following the sequential. Mic is the first thing we logged, 10, and then the statement. So let's move to the next control structure. That's basically all you need to know about the sequential control structure. Is the normal flow of every program. So the next control structure, this one is going to be a bit bogus, but I'm going to break it down step by step. That's what I'm supposed to do. So this one is basically the one that has to do with condition. So now, for example, take a look at your life. You have to make certain decisions every single day, and as you make those decisions, you're considering options. So is it that you pick this option and then this happens, or you pick this other option and then this happens? That's the same thing in programming, right? For example, a user wants to order for food on a food ordering application. The user can choose to order the food, 5 pieces of the food, and then get 5 pieces of the food, and then pay for 5 pieces of the food, or the user can order 1 and then pay for 1, right? So that's basically what selective or conditional means. So selective means you select a particular action based on the condition, and conditional means you have to make a decision. So that's basically what this control structure is. So this control structure makes use of specific keywords. Right, these keywords are, remember, keywords are basically reserved words, words that are used as a syntax in a particular programming language. You are not to use them when you're declaring a variable. Remember in the first video, variable declaration and all, you're not to use keywords. Keywords are reserved by the programming language, in that programming language. So you can see we have if, we have else, we have switch, and we have ternary operator. First one is the if statement, right? And in bracket we can put if else, right? So the if statement basically allows us, this is where conditioning comes into play, like very well. So when you have, for example, let's say const, okay, let's make it let, right? Let's user preference be equal to, so I'm going to do something now. I'm going to put user preference. So this is based off food, right? Rice. Let user preference be equal to rice, for example, right? So now I want to get the user's preference. If the user's preference is equal to rice, we want to add fish to it. Else, we don't want to add anything at all. So we're going to say if user preference is equal to, so I'm going to be dealing with operators in the next video, so stay tuned. If the user's preference is equal to rice, right, what should happen, right? We want to for example, want to say want to return, or for, okay, let's console.log fish added to your rice. Fish has been added to your rice, right? Else, if the user preference is not equal to rice, we just put console.log no fish was added, because you are not eating rice. No fish was added because you are not eating rice, right? So basically these are very simple examples, but now this user preference is being manipulated because by default we already know it to be equal to rice. In the real world, you'll be dealing more with dynamic data. That's data that comes from users, data that is dynamically loaded. Dynamic means it is not static, it has not been pre-edited somewhere, it is newly added either by the user or by the system. So yeah, we're going to make it that we prompt the user, right? We prompt the user, enter your preference, and if the preference is equal to rice, that's when we run this, enter your preference, and then we put bracket food, right? So this is basically what we want to ask the user. So let's go to our browser and you see this prompt loading. So you can see that we have this loading. So if I put rice, you can see fish has been added to your rice, right? Let's reload it, and then if I put let's say spaghetti, you see no fish was added to your rice because you're not eating rice. So that's a very, very simple way to deal with conditions. Let's look at a more complex version of this condition, right? So a voter system, right? This voter system, what it does is it checks for the validity of user's age and hands them a voter's card. So basically that's what this function is going to do, checks for the validity of user's age and hands them a voter's card. So the first thing that we need to do here is we need to ask the user for their age, and then we need a condition to determine their validity, and then in each of those conditions we determine what we're going to perform. So the first thing now, we're going to say const user age, we're going to say equal to, we're going to prompt the user. But remember, when we're picking up functions, we talked about prompt, that when you're asking the user to input a numerical value, you have to make it pass int. You have to pass the integer, and to pass the integer is basically if the user enters a string. By default, this is a string. JavaScript is like, it's a string by default. That's why we have pass int to remove every string from that particular input and bring out the integer values which are numerical, right? So we can say enter your age, right? And then the user enters their age, and then we have the condition to determine their eligibility. The condition, sorry, AI is giving me suggestions, but I want to keep it simple, to determine their eligibility, right? Eligibility. So that's basically what we want to do here. So the first thing is if the user is eligible. So I'm going to say if the user age, this time we want it to be 20, not 18. If the user age is greater or equal to 18, then we're going to print, or we're going to console.log, you are eligible and registered. Thank you. You are eligible and registered. Then put full stop and put thank you, right? Else, now remember there's a part of the if statement that allows for elongated conditions. Elongated conditions simply means conditions that continue over a certain period of time. So if you have more conditions to handle, you can use something called else if, right? A new line, else if. So else if is saying else if another condition, then we say if the user age is less than 20, and then I'm going to be dealing with logical operators here. So that and is going to be like this. I would explain this in the next video. And user age, we're going to say is greater than or equal to 16. What are we going to do? Because now the user age, we're saying if the user age ranges from 16 to 19, because anything less than 20 is 19, 18, 17, 16. Anything greater than or equal to 16 is 16. So from 16 to 19, we're going to console.log kindly submit your details, as we have a plan, or we have a procedure for you, right? They are not eligible. We'll first put not eligible, right? Kindly submit your details, because these people now, they are very close to the eligibility. From 16 to 19, they are very close to the eligibility age, right? But they are not eligible because they are not 20. And then finally, we want to handle for those that are below 16. So that's yes, exactly. We're going to put please come back after 4 years. AI helped me to complete that. You get the idea. So basically that's that. So let's comment this prompt out so that we do not get any disturbance, right? So once you comment it out, we can happily prompt the user, So enter your preference. Okay, it's still going to give us, let's just say rice. So now let's reload. Enter your age, right? So if I enter 17, you can see not eligible. Kindly submit your details, as we have a procedure for you. So let me make this more interactive. Let me make the responses an alert. Remember, we talked about window object in the contact form series, right? So I'm still going to look at this in depth in some specific JavaScript concept. I'm taking us through the concept that we're going to use in our e-commerce website, which is a very robust website that can be used for your business as a business owner. So the next thing we're going to be dealing with now is basically the repetitive or the branching control structure. So in simple terms, looping. This particular control structure allows us to loop or iterate over a particular sequence of characters or an array, an object. It could be a string, it could be an array of numbers. It could be you want to repeat you want to console.log something more than the usual time of you having to type it down. That's when you use loops. So there are three types of loops in JavaScript. We have the for loop, which is what we'll be looking at first. We have the while loop, and then we have the do while loop. So they are significantly different, but they can be used to perform the same thing. So I'm going to be giving examples, right? Simple examples where we'll be printing numbers from 1 to 5 using these three loops, using these three keywords. So let me just put the keywords down: for, while, do, while. So these are the keywords. You can see those are the keywords, and we're going to be printing number from 1 to 5, right? The simple example before we go into real world examples using them, and then we'll wrap up this video. So the first one, we have the for loop, right? So basically the for loop is commonly used when the number of iteration is known beforehand, right? So we use this when the number of iterations, so in bracket we can put loops. So that, for example, we already know the amount of iterations, we already know how many times we want to loop through. That's when you use the for loop. So for the number of times we have this, print this the number of times. So that's basically it. Number of loops is known beforehand, right? So we determine the number of times we want to use the for loop. So the example here is to print numbers from 1 to 5. So that's what we're going to be using this for loop to do. So the first thing we need to do, the for loop is like this. You type this down. Let's not worry about AI. Let's type it from scratch so we can understand properly. So we have I is used to represent the index, right? The first number, the initial number. We're starting from 1 since it's from 1 to 5. So this is how you should declare for loop. I is equals to 1, and then what is the range, right? I is obviously less than or equal to 5 because we're printing from 1 to 5. So I should be less than or equal to 5. So I will be 1, I will be 2, I will be 3, I will be 4, and I will be 5, right? So now how do we want to get to 5? We have to increment it. So incrementing and decrementing in JavaScript simply just has to do with either you increment or you decrement, and to decrement is to reduce, to increment is to increase. That's just what they mean, rather. So let's console.log hi. So let's see what this gives us, right, in our console. So you can see this gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's basically the for loop broken down, right? The for loop broken down. So let's look at a real world example. So I'm going to create an array. I'm going to call this students, and then inside here I'm going to create 4 students. I'm going to say John, and then Mark, and then Toby, and then Ebube, right? Ebube. This Ebube is a girl. So now we have Ebube. So now I want to loop through each of these students, and then we want to print out their names. Very simple. So print out the names of the students without us having to be doing students at index, remember array data type method at index of 0. We don't want to do this. We don't want to be doing this and having to do it from scratch, but we want to loop through them. So basically the for loop allows us to do that. So to do that, we just say loop. So that's for let I, so I is going to be equal to the student at, okay, I is going to be equal to student at the first name, and then we have Remember, you should always put let, because it's a variable that will change as I goes to the next one. The value changes 1 2 3 like that. So the next thing to do is to determine the range. So I is less than or equal to the student's dot length, right? Dot length. So that's basically it. I is less than or equal to, sorry, it's not comma, is this the student dot length, and want to increment, right? I plus plus. So now that we have that set, we can console.log I at index of I, or we can just console.log I. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, it's not giving us what we need, so we're just gonna say I is equal to 0. So 0 is going to be the this is students at index of I. Good. All right, so that's basically what we get. We get 1 2 3 4, but then we need the fifth one. So instead of starting from 0, we're going to start from 1, right? We're going to start from 1. Oh, sorry, we're starting from 0 because 0 is the first position of the first elements in arrays, remember. So I have the link to the video is in the description. So that's basically how you deal with for loops. So we just printed out everything. It's giving us undefined because the data type of what is being printed out here is undefined, right? I'm still going to cover up this in a separate video where I really talk about the difference between undefined and the null data type. So that's that about the for loop. So let's go to the while loop, right? So what is the while loop? Basically, the while loop is used, this loop is used when the number of iterations, so iterations basically means the number of times you loop through, you can put loops, is not known. So a very simple example for this one is a guess game, and this is when we are going to be making use of our HTML. Yeah, so this is when the number of is not known beforehand, right? Beforehand. So how do we determine this? We want to print number from 1 to 5, right? We want to print numbers from 1 to 5. So for us to determine this, now since we don't know the number of iterations, now look carefully. This is the difference between the while loop and the for loop. If you get the difference between the while loop and the for loop, I tell you, you can write any loop. You'll be able to program seamlessly because you'll be making use of loops. Like when you want to you want to cover up a certain array of elements or objects, you want to loop through them. If you can differentiate between the for loop and the while loop, you're good to go when it comes to functional and logical programming. That's when you practice them constantly. So right, so since we do not know the number of iterations beforehand, what we need to do is we need to declare what our starting point will be, right? We're starting from 1, right? We want to get to 5. In this place we also declared we're starting from 1, we want to get to 5, right? So let me just type it down, I'll explain. So I'll say let I be equal to 1. Let me just put something like starting point. Since we're starting from, remember, we're starting from 1, right? Starting point. And then we can say while the starting point, that's I, is less than or equal to the finishing point, that's 5. Let's keep console.logging whatever the value is, that's I, sorry, not key. And then after we do this, we would increment. So basically what this means, right, this is the same thing as the for loop. This is just spreading out the for loop, right? So basically what this means is the starting point is equal to 1. That's the same thing as the starting point here, but the starting point here is equal to 1 as well, right? The starting point here is equal to 1 as well. And then we have while this is less than or equal to this, that's the same thing here, while this is less than or equal to this. And then we have increment this, but first we are console.logging, and that's the same thing that's happening here. As this one is less than this, console.log, then it comes to this. So for loop is like, while loop is like for loop under the hood, right? Or for loop is while loop under the hood, rather, any of them. So if we let me just put a console.log here that says for loop, and then we'll put another one down here that says while loop. So if you check, you can see for loop we have 1 2 3 4 5, and then while loop we have 1 2 3 4 5. So that's that. So let me go through the while loop again. So the while loop is used when the number of iterations is not known beforehand, right? We don't know how many iterations we want to get to. Like now you can see we just defined it in here to be 5. What if now we really want to show that we don't know, and this is where. Alright, so guys, a real world example of the while loop here is going to be the simple one. So we're going to say real world example. So we're going to create a guessing game, right? And this guessing game is basically going to allow the user to input a guess, and then compares the guess with a secret number, and then allows them only 3 trials after a wrong guess to get the secret number. Allows them only 3 trials after a wrong guess to get the secret number, right? So that's basically what we're gonna do. So the first thing we need to do is to get our guess input, right? Our guess input, and our guess input has been created inside of here, right? We have it in here, right? We created it. So our guess input, we're gonna say document.get element by ID, and then we'll name this input, right? Input. And then once we have that settled, remember we're using the while loop to do this. The next thing to do is to get where we're going to display the message, and this message is whether the user guessed right, the user guessed wrong, or the guess has been exhausted, right? Or the trials has been exhausted. So we get this as display, right? So let's create that element down here. So I'm just going to say, remember it's an ID, so display, that's hashtag display. So that's all. So the next thing is to get our trials display, and then you can say document.get element ID number of trials. So this number of trials is where we're going to notify the user that okay, once they get the guess wrong, you have this number of trials left, right? So that's what we're going to do. So after we do this, we need to initialize the trials counter. So basically what this means is, remember the condition here is after 3 trials, game over, right? Once they have a wrong guess on the first input, start counting, right? So we want it to be 3 trials, so we say trials equals to 3. So that's basically what we're going to do. So now we're going to undo the button click, right? We're going to undo the button click. So I'm going to get the button, I'm getting the element, let's say query selector, because we don't have an ID. So button, that's the only button on the page. According to our contact form series, we discussed all this in depth. So we have click, and then inside click we have this. So basically what we want to do, we want to get our guess, but we want it to be within the trial. So while the trial is greater than 0, so 3 is greater than 0, remember we want to reduce it once they get a wrong guess, and as they keep guessing, once the trial is equal to 0, what are we going to do? We're going to end the game. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to say while the trials, so this is how you use the while loop. We don't know the number of times we want to keep guessing, but we know for sure that after 3 trials are over, we want to quit the game, right? Once they don't get the guess. So we're going to say greater than 0. 3 is greater than 0, so it will keep running everything inside here. So we can say let the guess, that's the user's guess. We're going to pass the integer, right? That's of what the user has entered, because by default the input is a string. So the value, so we've passed the integer, and then now I want to validate the input. So to validate the input is basically to check if what the user entered was a number. So if what the user entered in is a number, right? Is a number. So that's what we're going to do, and then we're going to say if is NaN. Remember we spoke about NaN in the contact form series. A lot was covered in that series actually, even if it was a very small project, a lot was covered. So this NaN means it's not a number. So if what the user entered is not a number, we want the display message or inner text to tell the user please enter a valid number, right? So that's what we want. So Now let's break this down. We've gotten all our variables, we've initialized our counter, right, for the while loop, and then we are on clicking this button, right, this particular button. What are we going to do? On clicking the button, we are determining, getting the guess, and then validating it to make sure that that's what the user enters. And since it's inside a loop, we break out of the program to quit the program if it is invalid, else if it is not invalid. So we're going to now check if the guess is correct, right? So that's what we're going to do. Sorry about the AI coming in, it's helping us actually. So say if the guess is equal to the secret number. So I'm going to explain what this means in the next video, right? So if it's equal to the secret number, we're going to display the message to the user which says you guessed right. Right, so that's what we're going to do. And then the trials display will display the amount of guesses left, right? So you guessed right. Remember, it's only when they guessed it wrong that we display something. So we want to clear any trial display value because the user guessed right. So that's what we want to do, and then we'll break out of the program because the user has guessed right. Else, right? So else, if the user guessed wrong, what do we want to do? The first thing I want to do if the user gets wrong, this is where the while loop now comes into play actually. So we reduce the number of trials, that's the first thing, and then we now check if the trials is greater than 0. That means if it is still greater than 0, that means we reduced it. If we reduce it for the first trial, it becomes 2. Remember, it is 3, right? If we reduce it for the first trial, it becomes 2. Remember, it is 3. And then the user guesses wrong again, we reduce it again, becomes 1. 1, remember, 1 is greater than 0, so it runs it again and asks the user to enter their guess. If we reduce it again and the user enters their guess, then it becomes 0, and 0 is not greater than 0, right? 0 is not greater than 0, and then that is game over. So it is only going to quit the whole program and tell the user game over once it reaches 0. That's once the user has missed their guess 3 times, right? So is equal to you guessed wrong. So you can see how we're breaking this down, and then the trials display dot the inner text is going to equal to, so we're simply going to put this inside template string literal, which allows us to dynamically add values to our string, variables to our string. So AI is helping us out. I'm just going to say you have this. So these trials represent the number of trials we have at this particular instance when the program is being run, right? So now that we've gotten that, if it is equal to 0, so let me just put this here. If the guess is still greater than 0, or if the number of trials rather is still greater than 0, then if the number of trials is less than 3, or if it's equal to 0, if the number of trials is equal to 0, right? So this is what happens. We're going to simply say display message dot inner text. I'm not going to tell the user game over, right? Game over. You run out of trials, right? You run out of trials. It's as simple as that. You can see how the while loop has worked for us. So you run out of trials, put a full stop, and that's all. And then we clear the number of trials. We clear anything that is being displayed as okay, you have this number of trials. We clear it to avoid any confusion. We clear it as to avoid any confusion, and that's basically all that we are gonna do. And finally, once we've cleared everything, all we need to do is to break out of the system, right? So all we need to do is to break out of the system. So breaking basically ends the program regardless. So anything that happens once you break out of it, it just ends the program. So now let me break this down again. So this is a guessing game that allows us to allows the user to enter an input and then compares the input with the secret number, which is 10, right? So let's just declare the secret number, we don't have the secret number declared, so I'm going to say secret number equal to 10. So that's the secret number. So once secret number has been declared, we got all our inputs and the display elements where we're going to be showing the messages based on the guess. And when we got the trials, which matches what we said here, 3. So as the user clicks on the button, that's after the user has guessed, we get the user's guess firstly, but then this user guess, everything is within the trials. So if we now validate the input to make sure that it is a number. If it's not a number, we end the program and the user can now run it again as per the click based on the guess. So if the user guessed correctly, we just put you guessed right, and then make sure that nothing like you have number of trials is showing, and then we break out of the program, which then breaks out of the loop, and then which then returns anything that we want, which is this particular you guessed right. Else, if the user guessed wrong, then we reduce the number of trials based on what the user got wrong, and then if it is still greater than 0, so once you reduce it the first time, it makes it 2. It runs this, you guessed wrong, you have this, but once it is equal to 0, which is this particular block, it runs this, that game over. You have this number of trials left. So number of trials display So now let's test this again. Let's go to our console, and then we guess, you can see showing us null. That's line 99. Trial display, number of trials. Okay, it's not meant to be a class, it's supposed to be an ID, number of trials. Yes, display number of trials. Let's put 10 and see if we get a correct guess. Guessed right. Let's put 9. Okay, you have 2 trials left. Let's put 2. You have 1 trial left, and then let's put 4. Game over. So basically, it's nothing happens again. You run out of trials. Then we can create a button that says reset, but then we'll just reload to keep it simple. So that's basically how you use the while loop, right? That's basically how you use the while loop. So the next type of loop that we'll be looking at, which is the last one before we end this video, is known as the do while loop. So that's, you can see the while loop has been used in a guessing game to reduce the number of trials so that we can get the end outcome. We don't know the number of times the user will guess, but we've determined it based on the number of trials, right? So the do while loop. So the do while loop is very similar to the while loop, only that this loop is used when you want the loop to execute. It is used when you want it to execute at least once before checking the condition. So an example is actually this guessing game. We want to check if the user has gotten the guess right or wrong first. Once the user gets it wrong, then we now start to check for the 3 attempts. But I'm going to be using another example here, right? It is similar to the while loop before checking the condition. So remember, this loop is like iterations, and to iterate over something is to repeat something. So now an example of the do while loop, let's put an example that's when we want to print 1 to 5, print numbers from 1 to 5. So we'll do that really quick. There's no need to waste time for this one. So let's just, it's the same thing as the while loop. So we'll say let j, we've created I already, is equal to 1. So we're printing from 1 to 5. So we're going to console.log. So the do basically allows us to perform the action, right? So let me put this in comment. Perform the function action. Print 1, right? Print 1. So that's the first action, and then increment it after, and continue to perform this action while j is less than or equal to 5. So you should only use the do while loop if you want to check for the condition without iterating first to see if there's a need to iterate. So is there a need to iterate? That should be after the first action has happened, right? That should be after the first action has happened. Exactly, that should be after it has executed first. So for example, a real world example, let's just check this. So I'm going to say console.log do while loop. So you don't need to actually use this do while loop as much. The while loop can actually work just fine. So let's go to our browser. You can see the do while loop example is printing 1 to 5. So you should only use the do while loop when you want the loop to execute at least once before, before printing out before iterating basically. So a real world example is an authentication system. So these are another common example basically of the do while loop. So we want to basically simulate, so to simulate something is to model it. So we want to simulate a user login process. So I need you to pay attention here. When you want to sign up, you need to enter your password, right? So basically we're going to ask the user for the username. So the correct password, the user has already signed up. So we're just mirroring this. The correct password is test123. That's the correct password. And then we want to get the user's input. So user's input, we're not going to be using DOM manipulation here. We're going to be using alerts, prompts, and all those things in this one. So the user input is equal to nothing, right? This is a fresh input. So the login attempts, basically you can see this is where the do while loop comes in. So the login attempts, we want to allow the user to try at least 5 times, right? Try at least, or at most, yes, try at most 5 times to log in. So this is where the do while loop comes in. So we're going to ask the user to enter their password, right? So we're going to ask them to enter their password. We're going to say user input. Remember, we've already declared the variable, so adding values to it. So we're going to ask the user to enter their password. Yes, enter your password. That's what we're going to ask the user to do. So look at it very well. Remember, the do while loop is only used when you want to execute it at least once. So executing it once is basically asking the user to enter their password, because we need to loop over the number of times the user will enter their password based on the number of times they got the password correct or wrong. So we need to first ask them. That's the once that the do while loop allows us to ask, right? So we also need to confirm that we also need to confirm that we are getting the number of attempts and printing it back to them. So once they enter their password, we want to tell them you have this number of attempts left, right? You have, for example, we want to tell them you have attempts left, login attempts, number of attempts left. So that's what we want to tell them after we ask them to enter their password. So if they enter it the first time, they miss it, it will reduce. They enter it the second time, they miss it, it will reduce. So now we want to actually check, right, if the user password is correct based on their input. I know this might be looking confusing, but trust me, once you get the basics of these loops, you're good to go, right? These examples are just to show you what they are capable of doing. So we want to check if the user input is equal to the correct password. I said I was going to explain the triple equal to sign. So if it is equal to the correct password, then we want to alert to the user that their login was successful, that they don't need to enter anything again. Login was successful, right? Successful. And then we'll break out of the loop. Remember, when you break out of the loop, you're basically exiting the loop, and this is a do while loop. We've not even done the while yet. Else, if it is wrong, just like the guess game, we reduce the attempts, right? We reduce the attempts that the user is trying to use to log in, reduce it, and then after we reduce it, we'll check if the login attempt is greater than 0, right? If it is still greater than 0, that means if it is not 0 attempts left, let's keep telling them that they have an incorrect password, right? Let's keep alerting to them that they have an incorrect password, and then they need to enter the correct thing, else it will keep reducing. But if they've entered the correct thing, even as they've entered the wrong thing falsely, then we'll tell them you have used up all your login attempts, right? You've used up all your login attempts. There's something wrong somewhere, and I would love to address it as soon as possible. And what is wrong here is the way we have this nested. Alright, is this that is basically wrong? Login attempts. So basically, now that we have login attempts, so we need to open up this. Alright, so that gives us an advantage. So everything is inside here. We allow to them you have used up all your login attempts, else it will keep telling them to try again, and then to keep running this particular prompt, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this prompt inside here again, right? I'm going to put inside here again, and login attempts. So everything is going to happen while the attempt, same thing, is equal to 0, is greater than 0 rather, and that attempt is basically the login attempt. Sorry. So just to get ourselves clear, let's break this down and understand what we're doing here. So an authentication system to simulate a user login process, we define the correct password, and then we give the correct password a value. That correct password is what the user is supposed to enter, and then we initialize the user input variable that will contain every single time the user enters a password, right? And then we have the login attempts. We're getting it to be 5 times. We want them to enter it 5 times. We want them to miss it 5 times, the account is locked, basically. So we're going to tell them, instead of game over, it's not game over, we want to tell them account locked. Exactly, that's what we want to tell them. Yeah, so login attempts. So once the account is locked, so now we're checking. We first ask the user, okay, enter this, and then we tell them how many attempts they have left. If they get it correctly, that's if their password is correct, they log in successfully. Else, if their password is wrong, it reduces the attempt first by 1, and then it checks if the attempt is not yet 0. It shows them that okay, you have incorrect password, and then tells them to enter their password again, that they have this number of attempts left. So once this is equal to 0, which is what this block does, it tells them that they've used up all their attempts and then locks their account. Everything here is going to happen only if the login attempt is greater than 0, which here we have it to be 5. But this is going to reduce once it's 0. This loop stops. So that's it's kind. So now let's reload this. Let me cancel this and reload it again. So there's one thing I want to correct, and that's we don't need to ask the user anymore, since it's going to run the loop again. So it's going to keep doing this if this is wrong, right? So I'm going to cancel this particular program. I'm going to reload it again. So okay, let's type the correct password. Let's say test123 login successful, and then it gives us our login. It allows us to log in, right? So let's type something wrong 3 times. Let's say 67664 incorrect password, try again. It asks us again, correct password, try again, asks us again, and then let's say we now type the correct one. It allows us to log in, and that's all. Let's now try to get everything wrong, right? Everything wrong. You see, you've used up all your login attempts, account locked. So this is how it works in the real world, only that they add, you know, a flow to it. So that's that basically about everything. In this video we covered, you know, sequential, which is normal flow of a program, selective, which has to do with conditions. So let me uncomment everything so that we can see clearly everything. The code will be made available for you to practice more. So I give you an exercise, which is I want you to build this particular guessing game using the for loop, using the while loop, and using the do while loop. So I'm going to attach the assignment down here. Assignment or exercise. Without using any, you know, ChatGPT or any of those things, build the guessing game, the exact same thing, only that you can add more. That once they do not enter a number, you should ask them to enter a number. So once they keep entering a wrong number, it's basically just, you know, quit the program. So using the for loop, while loop, and exactly using the following rules. The first rules, okay, the user should have 7 attempts to guess the number. The guess should be between 1 and 70, and then the user should be prompted to guess the number, or in other words, the guess should, or the user should be asked to type in the correct number, or type in a valid number 3 times after typing in the wrong one, an invalid number rather. So that's my exercise to you, and I know that you're gonna, you know, work on it just to, you know, improve the way you write your logic in JavaScript. So thank you for staying to the end of this video. In the next video we'll be looking at operators in JavaScript.